Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, ancient history ago, kind of like in the early days of this channel, which was like all of like 6 months ago, or really maybe 8 at this point, 2020, who can keep track of time? What is time anymore? Whatever the case, one of the earliest videos I did for this channel was this bound trade of The Valiant by the Valiant Universe, ironically enough, or coincidentally enough. And The Valiant, of course, is by Jeff Lemire, Matt Kind, Paolo, and Joe Rivera. The general premise of the story is there's this great figure of darkness who kind of embodies humanity's fears and paranoias, and every like 1,000 years or so it comes forward, and or every few hundred years it comes forth and kills a figure in the Valiant universe known as the Geomancer. Now, I don't know enough of the Valiant universe to explain the intricacies inherent of the Geomancer. My friend Michael, who's a co-owner of Ground Zero Comics, could probably tell you everything you need to know. And he has, for the record, on the Ground Zero Comics YouTube channel, done a two-part series about the Valiant universe. And then his dad, Dave, who's also a regular host of the Interestingly Enough segment, has done a sort of early Valiant universe, because the Valiant universe that exists today, or the Valiant company that exists today, is not the same one that was existing in like the 1990s. But that is its own thing. I'll post links in the description section below. Check them out because they are great people and they are super nerds like yours truly. Except they're cool, you know. Anyway, the important thing about the Valiant universe is there's a scene in the book where the Eternal Warrior, one of the recurring characters in the Valiant universe, faces off against this creature as he has on 3 previous occasions, and each time he has lost and the Geomancer has died. This time, he does what is kind of, how you say, to quote Deadpool, that, oh, it's the superhero thing, it's the superhero thing. There's a 2-page spread in this book where we see just about all the characters in the Valiant universe to date. I note over here on the far right side is Punk Mambo, one of my favorite characters personally. Now, there's a lot of figures on this page, and this is meant to sort of be kind of like the scene in the movie where you see all the superheroes at once charging at the bad guys, and it's supposed to be super epic and cool and awesome, and it is. But I want, for the purpose of today's video, I wanted to bring attention to this woman up here in the corner. You'll note she's blonde, she has a white and blue uniform, and she's plus-sized, and she's flying through the air, zipping through the air really quickly. Again, she's one small part of the larger collective whole, but she's going to be the focus of today's video, because looking back over the videos I've done so far, I was like, you know what, we probably need a break between all of the Robert Crumb stuff. And honestly and truthfully, it was an opportunity to go back to one of my favorite books of all time, which is Faith, Vol.1. Now, I admit, without any hesitation whatsoever, Michael of Ground Zero Comics pushed Faith on me. I originally encountered the character when we did Harbinger Volumes 1 and 2 for the graphic novel book club that meets up at Ground Zero, and honestly, I didn't like it. Like, it's one of the few books in the Valiant universe that I really did not like, for a whole host of reasons that I might get to someday or I might not. Whatever the case, just at me on Twitter and we'll move on with our lives. Whatever the case, that book was interesting because it introduced this character here. Her name is Faith, and she's awesome. Like, she's just really cool and really fun. And the reason for that is really simple. She's a nerd. And when I mean nerd, I'm talking like super nerd. Like as in like me on steroids, if you can picture something like that. She loves Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who. She references Stranger Things, but not really Stranger Things, all the time. She collects action figures. She collects game memorabilia. The point is Faith embodies what most people would sort of understand in today's society as the sort of geek slash nerd slash dork character. Except she's a superhero. And I recognize that the phrase superhero with sort of real-life charm is something that gets thrown around a lot, particularly in the Marvel universe especially. But what I will sort of argue to my last breath is that Faith embodies that probably more than any character I've ever read in just about any comic book. Because, yes, Wonder Woman might do a Pilates course, and sure, Scarlet Witch will occasionally stop and try to figure out what her income taxes are going to look like this year. But what's really fun about Faith is the fact that she'll reference Ghostbusters 2, and she'll point out a scene that you're like, oh my god, I completely forgot that. And that's not the selling point of the book. What's important is the fact that she has a charm to her personality, and she's quirky and goofy in a way that feels real while I'm reading this book, in a way that I haven't really gotten in any other superhero comic that I've read before. And so today's Faith, Volume 1, Hollywood and Vine, is just sort of an opportunity to sort of observe the character of Faith and see why she's an interesting superhero in terms of the genre overall. So, before I continue to just sort of ramble as I always do in the opening segment, let's talk about Hollywood and Vine and figure out what exactly is it about and why I think this book is worth your time. Alright, when talking about Faith, Volume 1, Hollywood and Vine, we have to remember one very important thing. This is a superhero book, which means in terms of the genre, this is escapist literature. The reader is not trying to find a realistic depiction of, say, contemporary existence. It's not so much about introspection, or if it is, it's a very shallow introspection for the most part. But while some people have typically levied that against superhero comics overall, hopefully if you're a regular viewer at this point, you know and understand that as much as I love books by like Art Spiegelman and Robert Crumb and Phoebe Gloeckner and stuff like that, I don't shit on superhero comics. In fact, I love superhero comics. Again, growing up, I read Captain Underpants regularly. I read Calvin and Hobbes. That's the book that literally taught me how to read. So, in my defense, I do not hold any reservation in saying that superhero comics are a legitimate genre in and of themselves. They're a genre that typically falls under a lot of commercial avenues, and so at that point, sometimes they can be a bit much or a little too present in our day-to-day lives. But what's unique about Faith, Hollywood and Vine is the fact that it doesn't necessarily subvert the superhero story. Again, the story of Faith takes place after the Harbinger epic, and I'm going to be real, I haven't read that. So there's references in this book that even I don't get. But again, if you haven't picked up a Valiant book, definitely feel free to start up with the Harbinger series, because even though I didn't like it very much, it's still a really solid story. Like, I've yet to come across a bad Valiant book. This book takes place after that. There's been a massive battle between a race of beings known as Psiots. These are human beings who possess otherworldly abilities. Surprise, surprise, otherworldly abilities in a superhero comic book. Nevertheless, that's what this book is about. Faith has come off of that big group struggle to overcome Harada Enterprises and has decided to set up shop in the city of Los Angeles and be a superhero there. Now, her dream was originally to be a reporter, thus giving her an inside edge to events going on in her day-to-day life. You'll observe here in this daydream sequence, she's picturing, yes, I'll go out and I'll be a reporter and I'll save hunky male celebrities who in turn will ask me to be part of be in their films and then ask me to be their girlfriend. And oh, life is going to be so super cool and romantic. Which is then followed up with the cold reality that, for the most part, she works in a multimedia content distribution network, aka she's somebody who makes clickbait every day. Clickbait articles, listicles, what have you. Who is Brad Pitt dating today? And why can't Jennifer Aniston find a man? And oh my god, does those references not date me at all, okay? The point is in the book is that Faith is attempting to actually be a superhero, but also sort of dealing with the sort of mundanity of day-to-day life. And that's something that's pretty damn relatable, because each one of us hold our own sort of ambitions about what we would like our life to be, and then what we actually have to be. Now, the story also follows a group, or a small pair of Psiots who find themselves being kidnapped by a sort of secret, shady society. What we eventually find out, in fact, is that this secret society is an alien race of beings known as the Vine. Now, this ties into other Valiant universes. Check out Exo Man of War for that. But the key thing here is the Vine are a race of aliens who look very much like humans, who have basically infiltrated our society, infected multiple levels of our society to become big figures in politics and the entertainment industry, and my God, we're pushing into QAnon territory, which we're not going to go there. Whatever the case, the Vine are attempting to capture psiots to eventually overthrow humanity and try to find a way back home. Now, how exactly are they going to do that? By basically producing a lot of television shows and basically dominating the entertainment industry? I have no idea. That's part of the area of the plot where things get a little hokey to me, but at the same time, there manages to be some sort of interesting commentary, because Faith eventually stumbles upon the Vine and their plan, and eventually confronts them with the help of a fellow superhero by the name of Torque. Now, Faith is not the name of her Faith is not the name of her superhero persona. In fact, she typically calls herself Zephyr because she can fly through the sky. That's basically how her superpowers manifest. But while she is sort of undergoing this massive conspiracy and plot, it's also important to note that she's trying her best to be a superhero. She works with Archer, who, fun fact, is a character in another great Valiant book, Archer and Armstrong. And I guarantee you, I'm going to cover all of the Archer and Armstrong books because they are fucking hysterical and fucking amazing. Like, seriously, if you haven't read a Valiant book, go out, read it. It's worth your time. Anyway, what's important about the story is it's not just a sort of slow, steady build-up to an epic fight scene. There's lots of humor and comedy in this book, particularly when Zephyr is alerted to a potential crime. She stumbles upon the warehouse that she thinks originally is going to be, say, a group of thugs, a possible kidnapping situation, and then she goes in, and it's a bunch of crooks who have kidnapped a bunch of puppies. It's cute. It's a fun story. But while Faith is struggling to try to find a way to sort of continue to justify her superhero existence in Los Angeles, she's also dealing with lingering feelings for her ex-boyfriend, who happens to be a superhero with super strength. He, following the sort of Harada fight, has become a reality television show star, and so he's constantly out in the public eye, and she's constantly having to see it, and she's just repulsed and disgusted by it. But what is the sort of final concluding arch of this particular story? Ultimately, we see that Faith manages to defeat the Vine, save a lot of psiots, liberate her ex-boyfriend Torque from his evil, creepy ex-girlfriend, or his evil, creepy reality show girlfriend, and then, more importantly, Faith is able to make interpersonal connections with people at the website where she works. It's a fun read. It's my rambly plot description aside. What's really fun about Faith is there really is not a page of this book that won't make you smile in some form or capacity, because while I sort of talked around it, it's important to note that constantly throughout the text, she's making small references either to pop culture phenomena in her universe, or just references to stories that most nerds will be like, hey, I get that reference, which makes you feel very validated if you're a nerd. But also, probably one of the best parts about Faith is that she's a kind person, and there isn't a lot of fluff and rhetoric around her. She recognizes when she makes mistakes, when she feels guilty, or when she feels like she's not doing enough. And in this particular sequence, when a house is blown up by one of the members of the Vines, she tries to understand, have I really done anything? And more importantly, have I helped anyone? And that's something that sometimes I feel can kind of get lost in superhero books, because sometimes the high drama of the otherworldly cosmic conflicts just take over, and you tend to forget that these are human beings who are trying to do right by humanity and make their world a better place. Faith is a real person. She is the superhero we would want to actually exist, because after she would fight a supernatural being from another dimension, she would probably sit down and play a game of D&D with us, or go to Boards and Bites or something like that. Whatever the case, Faith is a delight in terms of the story, especially in this first volume. And so, looking at just that alone, there's plenty to love in this book. But while the content, I think, is really interesting, let's also talk a little bit about why I think formally this book has plenty to offer the reader, because again, when it comes to superhero comics, one of the charges levied against it is there isn't always a lot of play with the form, to which case I would disagree. So let's get to that. All right. So I have talked at length now why I think Faith is pretty dope as a story. It's a fun read, which is what a superhero book is supposed to be. Now again, one of the charges that are often leveled against superhero comics is that they're not very creative, especially when we consider the medium of comics. Because again, when we talk about comics, it has to be a balance between words and art. You can have a great story, but if the art sucks, nobody's going to remember your book. Likewise, if you have beautiful art but no story to tell, you might get away a little bit there, but it's still going to be hard, particularly in the superhero genre. In this particular genre, art and words have to work together in order to create the experience, because again, we're talking about a medium in which people are reading this book to kind of just escape into another world, to escape into a story. Some people can talk trash about that, but we're not going to do that here. So how exactly does Faith work in that regard? Well, again, one of the interesting things about Faith is the fact that she can be very imaginative. Again, the general premise is that she's somebody who grew up watching a lot of Doctor Who and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings, and just picture all the sci-fi shows and fantasy and sci-fi comics, just all the imaginative claptrap you could imagine, the stuff that makes nerds like me go, that's cool. That's Faith, and as such, throughout the text, we receive regular interruptions from the book as she will sort of undergo a fantasy sequence. Or if I can fall back upon the one I employed at the start of the story, when she's sort of imagining, well, I have a master's degree. When she's imagining what life in Los Angeles would look like. One of the important things you can see right off the bat is the panel arrangements are designed in a very diagonal pattern. This is to sort of indicate and build off of the fact that she's picturing this super cool life, and oh my gosh, look at all the action she's going to encounter. She's going to, like I say, save hunky male celebrities with like really awesome abs and stuff, and then oh my gosh, things are going to get so steamy and hot, and oh, everybody's going to think I'm so cool, and oh my gosh, look at my hair and how big and flowy it is. I look so great. This is going to be my life. And then on the very next page, it pulls back. You'll note the sort of long sweeping horizontal, the long sort of diagonal panels that swell up most of the page are now broken up by sort of smaller horizontal panels in which we feel more and more kind of some talking heads, but then also the sort of drab quality of her office space. We feel the sort of claustrophobia of her cubicle, that awful column, which I don't know why somebody would put that in an office because, oh my God, get rid of it. But you can see immediately, just in terms of the layout of the panels, the shift which has taken place. Again, Faith is an imaginative individual. She likes to think of the possibilities. She wants to think about all the cool things that she's going to experience, and that will then immediately conflict with reality. Now, another important thing to point out here is you'll observe the difference in color. Whereas this one, the colors sometimes have a tendency to sheen a little bit more. There's more of an effort to create a kind of realistic looking atmosphere and environment. If you look at the hair of her boss, you can physically feel that hair just by looking at it. You can feel the drab texture of the walls in this awful establishment. Whereas if you turn to the previous page, you'll note that the colors are softer. This is again an effort to sort of create the notion that this is something taking place inside of her mind rather than a concrete reality. So whereas fantasy sequences will usually have a sequence where the colors tend to be a little softer, I would argue maybe even fleshier, if I can use that adjective very carefully, you'll observe that you can just perceive that this is not the real world, which is then juxtaposed to the hard concrete reality of mundane corporate existence. It's a little effort, but it's an effort that really demonstrates the concern for the book, and in particularly how the medium is going to influence Faith's story. If we look at another example of while she's there at the office, we can observe this sequence here where she's being assigned the job of writing more or less like a listicle or clickbait review of the reality show Something to Torque About that her ex-boyfriend is on. And you can see in each of these panels the slowly growing tension as, one, she clearly doesn't want to do it, the pressure and the anxiety placed on her by her boss, and then the click, click, click right here, we're able to kind of feel her pain vicariously as she has to see her ex-boyfriend, somebody she cared about so immensely, living this stupid, superficial, reality, bogus bullshit life, and feeling at this moment that she's wasting time and effort that could be spent actually helping people, which is then interrupted on the next page by this beautiful two-panel page in which we see Zephyr flying through the air and then blocking out the sun as she makes her descent. There's a lot of little choices that may not seem terribly, dramatic when compared to other graphic novels, but there's still, in my opinion, a really good execution here. Again, Jody Hauser, Francis Portela, Marguerite Sauvage, and Andrew Dahlhaus, and I apologize if I've mispronounced any of those names, are working together collaboratively to make, in my opinion, a really good comic book. The colors are solid, the panel layouts are great, and the colors, again, regardless of whether this is a real-life moment or a fantasy sequence, you can feel the artistry that is going into every single one of these pages. And in my opinion, probably one of the best pages in this book is where Faith actually confronts the Vine and challenges them. We see this 5-panel page in which we're observing visually Faith's life after the death of her parents. But if you look at the words, and if you look at the way the colors and the arrangements are working together, we can see how it's contributing to this notion that it was stories that saved Faith in the wake of her parents' death. And that's accomplished by these long horizontal panels being arranged just sequentially to slowly lead you down to the fact that it was a story, that it was a comic, that it was imagination that sort of finally liberated Faith into a sense of her individual self. And again, the use of color is being employed as well to create the fact that this is a memory, but in a way it becomes one of the most powerful moments in the book. And then one more panel, because it is really important to discuss, which is that sometimes we forget how important panel layouts and excuse me. As always, I remain bum-fuzzled, what have you. When we're talking about superhero comics, we're talking about an action-driven comic, and so what's important is the way you bend the rules when creating your particular medium here. You see how Zephyr is flying into the action, just bursting in front of this previous panel here, and then as well the perspective of her, this villain looking up at her, and then the viewer looking up as well, before she is eventually able to beat them all and then escape from the building before the enemies explode. It's accomplished really well, so you can tell that there's a concern for the emotional impact of this book as well as the necessary action impacts. If I haven't addressed it enough already, at 8 minutes, holy crap, I hope I have. What's important is that Faith is very much a superhero comic, so there's plenty of action in terms of the arrangement of the panels on the page, but there's just as much effort concerned with Faith's emotion as an individual human being that are accomplished through the panel layouts, that are accomplished through the use of color and perspective throughout this book. This is not something like Mouse or Watchmen or Zap Comics or something like that, where you feel like you're seeing something innovative, but it's not trying to be innovative. It's just trying to tell a story and then occasionally use the tools of the medium or some of the tricks of the medium to further build that narrative. So, in my opinion, Faith does a really interesting job of showing what is possible through the medium of comics. And so with that said, let's do the final hurrah and call it a day. Well, I really don't know what else must need to be said. Faith as a story is fun. It's action-packed, it's suspenseful, it's just a blast to read. It's what a superhero book should do. It should entertain you and make you go, wow, that was great, give me more, please. And then formally what this book manages to do is to just sort of further build upon that. You become aware as you're reading the book that the medium is helping the narrative, helping the energy of this book, and really developing Faith's character as a superhero. Faith, Volume 1, Hollywood and Vine is a great book. And so if you like superhero comics, or even if you've just never read a Valiant book before, I would definitely recommend go out, pick up a copy of Faith, because one, you won't regret it. You'll fall in love with the character and then immediately have to buy everything else, and your local comic book shop owner will thank you. But then also, two, it's an opportunity to just sort of catch a new breath of fresh air in terms of the superheroine in comics. We're at a time right now, especially with so much proliferation of superheroes in the movies, it's easy to forget sometimes that it's comics where things got started. And that while there's so many comics out there filled with superheroes that are having these dramatic storylines and trying to be introspective, Faith is a delight. Because she's just a nerd trying to live her life and trying to help her immediate community, which, you know, is kind of what a superhero is in real life. Food for thought. I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. As always, like, share, and subscribe, all that jazz. It helps me know that you like the videos and that you want to keep seeing me bungle my words and do weird, like, affectations and mannerisms in front of a camera to make a fool of myself. But hey, you know what? You're laughing, right? Right? Please say yes, I need this in my life. Whatever the case, thank you for watching. If you're interested in Faith, Volume 1, Hollywood and Vine, I guarantee you your local comic book shop probably has a copy of this trade, or perhaps some of the original issues, because this is a bound trade the way a lot of these Valiant books that I've been holding up here are. And Valiant is also, at least it has in the past, I can't speak for the current state of the company, but Valiant has been really good to comics retailers in terms of promotional materials, in terms of shipment arrivals, what have you. So your comic book shop owner will probably have Faith. If they don't, I guarantee you they could probably order it for you. If they don't and they can't, don't forget to check out your local public library. More and more libraries are adding graphic novels and comics to their collection, and if they still don't have it, ask for an interlibrary loan form. They can help you out. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Go read some comics.